Good morning. This is Melissa Buckley with the Multifamily Upgrade Program. It's 11 o'clock right now, so I thought we would go ahead and get started with our second day of the Operations and Maintenance Manual training. We've got John Rockwell from Partner Energy on the line. He's going to be taking us through the training today. For those of you that have joined us throughout this series, John has given the majority of these webinars and has a wealth of information on the subject, and he's the National Client Manager with Partner Energy. We've got a lot of content today, so I want to encourage you all to make sure to enter your questions into the questions box, and if you look at this slide, it'll show you how to do that. So this is just a little bit about how to use GoToWebinar. This is the toolbar that you should see on your screen after you've logged in. The easiest way for us to take questions is if you type into the questions box. So just expand that box, type your question, I'll receive it, and then what we will do is break at the end of each section today, and I'll take questions and let John answer those for all of you. If you've got something really urgent, you can also raise your hand and then I can contact you as well. We won't be unmuting anyone today just because we've got a lot of material to get through. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to John so we can dive in. John, take it away.
Great, thanks, Melissa. All right, yeah, happy to be back for this final day of the Operations and Maintenance Manual webinar. So here is the overall course agenda for the 2 days. Last week, we hit the introduction to O&M manuals, the adapting to new requirements, and the introduction to the various sections of the O&M manual. So today, we're really going to focus on these last two, step-by-step O&M manual creation, and then how that all fits into so the best practices and MUP integration, sort of an FAQ, frequently asked questions for topics germane to the MUP program. Like Melissa said, got a pretty high slide count this time, so we'll be hopefully covering things in just enough detail to make it exciting and relevant, but also get everyone out to lunch in a timely manner. So I always like to do a brief review of the previous day's webinar. So I picked a few slides from day one webinar and really just talking about at a high level, what the O&M manual is. At its most fundamental, it's taking chaos of building maintenance, facility management, building engineering, taking all that chaotic data and process and making order out of it, creating a structured, repeatable guidance that's not dependent upon individual staff members' institutional knowledge or what they have squirreled away in their desk, but a centralized depository of information germane to having the building run in a smooth, efficient manner, something that can be repeated over and over again, regardless of the staff that's on site. So that really is summed up nicely in this slide from the energy.gov website, where they talk about the sort of overall sort of whole building healthy maintenance approach, and they break down 5 key distinct functions that make facilities maintenance function. And so they identify operations, maintenance, engineering, training, and administration. And within that, the O&M manual is a critical key part to keep that basically being a well-oiled machine and something that everyone can rely on, because beyond establishing and facilitating links between those 5 categories, what the O&M manual is helping to do is to have department managers make their case in the face of ever-shrinking budgets that they have to deal with over and over again as the years go by and the annual budgets get set. Now, that is very germane to sort of large buildings that have a lot of different staff members and a lot of different layers of management. But the same rule applies to smaller buildings. The smaller the building, the less staff, the more hats each staff member are wearing, but the relationships and the dynamics still remain the same. The facilities manager is always going to be advocating for more budget to do what they want for the next year. And the ownership group may or may not be receptive to that. There may be a shrinking budget, there may be a neutral or a flat budget, there may be an expanding budget, but the whole concept is that in the face of external constraints, you need to put your best foot forward in terms of facilities management, and a strong O&M manual is critical to that. So last time we looked at O&M manual examples briefly, and the takeaway here is that O&M manuals come in all shapes and sizes, and the idea is not to tie yourself or wed yourself to a manual that doesn't work for you. You know, maybe there's a sample online, maybe there's a template that you got from somewhere else. Change it however you see fit to best suit your building and your team. So they can look more like a presentation here with lots of graphics, lots of colors, lots of white space. They can also look more like a traditional manual with college rule, black and white, sort of dry material presentation. But there's no right answer in terms of which was better, which is worse. It's what works best for you, what works best for your team, what works best for your building. So take away the key concepts of what a manual has to have, but then make it your own and make it, especially the building's own, to be tailored correctly to the building. So creating the manual, we've broken it up and went over this briefly a little bit last time too, but the 7 main categories of an O&M manual are here: basic info, special certs and verifications, programmatic requirements, irrigation/water conservation, equipment manuals, maintenance log templates, and additional documents. And so we're going to go through each one of these and talk about what they mean in more detail and how to best populate them going forward in a manual. And I'll refer back to this sheet between each section so we can see the context of where we are in the broader part of the manual. So for number 1, basic info, fairly obvious. It needs to contain the basic information of the building. The most obvious one is site name, building address. But we also need a full documentation of all the stakeholders that are involved in the building, whose information we might need. The general contractor, the architect, the MEP team, all the way up to the ownership group and the development group, all the way down to building engineers, janitorial staff, or companies, if that's outsourced. But the point here is to have a central repository, and that'll be an overarching theme, so centralizing our data location. But the idea here is that we don't have a stack of business cards scattered around 3 different desks. We have the master list of contact information. And of course, especially MUP relevant, utility and service provider information. We're going to have the electric company, the gas company, the water company. But go as detailed as possible in that section. Don't just have Southern California Edison. Have Southern California Edison, their contact information, your account information, your meter numbers if possible. Having all of that data available at your fingertips pays worlds of dividends later on when you need to access that information in like an energy audit or a benchmarking study or any kind of sort of problematic situation where you might need to access something as granular as like a meter number. And then some things that may not be immediately obvious for basic info are external resources. the city's building department, the municipal information, the county information, but also public transit information and other external resources. So the way this looks like in some sample formatting, we can see we have different tables with the relevant information on them, and this would just be placed sequentially in the manual. But there's water information in the upper left, and we have the company name, the address, their location, their phone number. We have the same thing in the upper right for our recycling provider. And then bottom left, we have our public transportation options. So we have things like bus lines, rapid transit, the metro bus system, the light rail, the train system, even down to rideshare information. All these type of things are helpful, and especially if you have a building that is obtaining green certifications like LEED or Green Globes, having this type of sustainable oriented information in this section of the report is definitely helpful. And then we can have other things like guides, rules, suggestions for how to use the O&M manual to people who aren't overly familiar with it or weren't involved in its drafting. So in the upper right, we have stop signs. We say, please read this. Actions and activities recommended in this O&M manual should only be attempted by trained and certified personnel. So if you're the new guy first day on the job reading this, don't go do a blower door test or do a flue inspection without the proper tools, certification. When in doubt, hire the best personnel available and don't initiate it yourself. Other things like the middle box here is more of a mission statement for the O&M manual. A successful O&M program requires cooperation, dedication, and participation at all levels and cannot succeed without everyone involved understanding the basic principles and supporting the cause. So this kind of goes back to the earlier slide of what type of O&M manual do you want? Do you want one that is more sort of a dry presentation of facts, or one that is a bit of a rallying cry for your team that includes things like the mission statement, the motivation for why you're doing it, and sort of speaks to members of the team to remind them of why they're buying into the idea of a strong O&M manual. So things like that are helpful in the beginning. And lastly, we have the yield sign here, letting people know that they can think about the sort of cost-benefit ratio of a strong O&M manual, low cost, no cost measures versus more capital-intensive sort of traditional energy conservation measures. So part two, special certifications and verifications. So for this section, we're really looking for two main parts. There should be a summary table at the beginning, immediately evident in this section, that outlines any certifications or unique verifications that will be required at the property. And these can be sort of stick or carrot certifications and verifications. There can be the stick-driven things that you have to do, CALGreen compliance. There can be the carrots that you were incentivized to do, like Energy Star certification or LEED certification. But they should all go here. They should all be listed in a laundry list. And how that list looks is up to you. You can include sort of as little or as much information about those certifications in the summary table as you want. There could be a date awarded column next to the name of the certification. There could be a date expiring or a renewal date. Whatever helps communicate the information to the team in the way that you see fit. And then secondarily, the second part is focused on the actual documentation itself. So hard copies of the certifying documents would be great. They don't have to be original. They can be photocopies, or if it's a web-based certification, verification, whatever screenshot or printout is available there. But obviously, for sort of organizational sake, they should be placed in the order of how they appear on the summary table, so there's no sort of hunting and pecking confusion to try to go find it. And so one of the samples of how this can look is on this slide. We're looking at a CALGreen snapshot. So listed items, they should include any specific equipment or site-specific constructions that require certification through a third-party source. So when we're looking at the CALGreen box, here we have special instructions required by the CALGreen code or by the local enforcing agency shall be verified. Upon completion, a copy of inspection, verification, and/or certificates of completion shall be included in this manual. And you have a bullet point list of what those major equipment verification and testing requirements are. And so obviously in the bottom section you would fill out any relevant or germane additional verifications or certifications as it relates to, in this case, CALGreen. And so one of the takeaways here that I like to see in the manual, or sort of, sorry, in the accompanying each certification or verification, is what do I need to get the next version or to get the renewal for this specific certification. So if I'm doing Energy Star, I would have a list talking to whoever's reading the manual of, oh, I need my 12 months of utility bill data. Oh, I need an updated occupancy count, something like that. You know, for CALGreen, obviously it's a little bit more of a one and done type certification, so that wouldn't be as germane to that specific certification, but still laying out the next steps, plotting out the next steps in a very clear, easy to find manner is it's one of the main reasons the manual's here. So it should definitely be included. And I imagine most people on the call are familiar with HERS certification. So yes, even in sort of lengthy certification documentation programs like HERS certs, the hard copies should be included in this section of the manual. So the point that this slide is trying to get across is that yes, and forgive me if you can't read it, but in the little page in the upper left is page 23. The little page in the bottom right is page 77. So what we're saying here is page 23 through 77 of this manual is taken up entirely by HERS certification documents, and that's okay. You know, we should not shy away from this section of the manual being pretty hefty. You know, include whatever documentation you have and you need to have a robust paper trail for you, your staff, future generations will be using the manual. And I realized I forgot to pause at the end of the previous section, so I'll pause now and see if anyone has any questions about those first two sections. If not, I'll just run right on through.
Yeah, I don't have any questions in the questions box, so go ahead, and if you all would like to ask a question, please just use that questions box and we'll get to it.
Okay, great. So part 3, programmatic requirements. So here is, I'll just take a step back here. This is kind of the other side of the same coin for special certs and verifications. They're not entirely unrelated. So programmatic requirements, depending on the purpose and scope of your O&M manual, some additional information may be required here to meet the requirements of the verifying body that's running the program. So projects may be involved in multiple programs at once. So it's important to review and understand the standards of each before we issue the final product in this section. And so what that means is, let's take an example. To comply with State of California CALGreen requirements, it's important to include all of the other programmatic information that rolls up into that requirement. So in this case, we're talking about information regarding the solar renewable incentive program. For this hypothetical manual, for this hypothetical building, those two went hand in hand, and we should note that here. And so it can be very simple. It should be boilerplate text about the program, but it needs to be referenced here as being done, and the sort of the through line being drawn that shows that this program was done, and this program was done as part of sort of a broader programmatic requirement. So it would look something like this. You know, we don't. The intent here is not to go to the Solar Incentive Program website to read through all of their program material and then type up a one-page summary of what you read. It's simply going to the program that you know you have done, copying and pasting the sort of high-level description of the program or other relevant information about the program here, so it does not have to be hunted for later on. So the guy who comes in and says, oh, hey, where's the information for that solar program? You're like, well, Google it. I think it's still active. You can find it out there somewhere. No, he should be able to go to the manual, and to beat this to death, he can go to the manual in an orderly, centralized way and clearly understand the programmatic compliance that the property has gone through, you know, both in the past and in the present. And so that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to establish that paper trail. So this and this can be anything. I know we focused a lot on CALGreen compliance since it is mandatory, but it can be whatever's relevant. It could be HUD, financing information. It could be Energy Star information. It could be local city compliance. If you have a building in San Francisco and you're doing benchmarking or energy auditing as part of that local law. Likewise in LA, that'll be happening in the next few years, so you'll have to account for that information here as well. And that really sort of feeds into a broader point, is that the O&M manual is not a one and done static document. It's a living, breathing document that is updated at least annually, but whenever necessary as new information comes in to your building and is germane to the operations and maintenance practice. So for that City of LA building, their O&M manual right now has nothing about city energy auditing or benchmarking. But in a year or two, you will now need to update this section of the O&M manual with the benchmarking compliance language that you copy and paste from the website, just like you did with the Solar Incentive Program, and any other relevant information to make the building engineer's life easier. So part 4, irrigation and water conservation. We can move right into that unless anyone had any questions about part 3.
Nope, go ahead.
Awesome. So irrigation and water conservation. So this is relatively new in terms of being a standalone section of an O&M manual. It has not traditionally been one of the pillars, or at least standalone pillars, of the O&M manual. It's kind of buried in the other sections. But CALGreen has made this a requirement, more or less, that it is now addressed on its own, and it's a great thing. Makes sense for California. And so when we're talking about irrigation and water conservation, we must have 3 parts addressed in this section. The first one being sort of and then let me just take a step back. The 3 parts can be summarized as past, present, and future. So the past is the existing conditions. So we have to document what is on site today. And that could come from the building engineer's knowledge. It can come from a PCA, property condition assessment, come from an energy audit, you know, whether it's coming from a third-party review or the staff's institutional knowledge. Just getting it down on paper is sort of the critical first step. And then secondarily, the current, the now, is what are some tips and tricks for the on-site staff to reduce water consumption. So it's a little bit of these are our best practices for running this particular building. So you would take a generic tips and tricks, best practice list, and then trim it down and mold it to meet the specific requirements and quirks of your building. And then the third part would be the future, addressing potential system upgrades to improve conservation, preferably via low-cost alternatives. If you can get higher-cost alternatives as part of that budget that's approved by management or ownership, great. But at the very least, we need to identify improvement opportunities via low or no-cost measures. So for part two, the now, some of the typical tips to improve water conservation are listed here. So the obvious one is conform to municipal and state ordinance laws. It's required. You have to do it. Okay, that's a bit of a given. But if you're not aware of what they are, you might not be doing them. Unknowingly out of compliance, unknowingly open yourself up to a potential fine or levying of a fine. And then 2 and 3, using drought-tolerant or native plants and using mulch or other soil improvements to reduce runoff and evaporative loss. Those are huge, huge topics for California. I would imagine everybody on the line has heard of that either for their commercial properties or for their homes, or at least in their neighborhood. They're seeing a lot of houses do that type of thing, taking out the lawn, putting in the native drought-tolerant landscaping. It's a big movement, and there may or may not be subsidies available to help pay for that transition if your building does not have drought-tolerant landscaping. Next, installing efficient irrigation systems and adjusting schedules to meet seasonal and plant-specific watering needs. Again, that seems obvious, but it's one of those things that is like it's like retro commissioning. You know, you obviously want your building energy management system to be operating well, but over time things drift. People get busy, new equipment gets installed piecemeal, new staff comes online, and making sure that the system is tuned up to its maximum optimizational state becomes a low priority. So we need to prioritize it. And so annual review, semi-annual review of the system to make sure that it is dialed in and is doing things properly is critical. And likewise within that, scheduling irrigation at the proper time is a good best practice. The obvious one being, we don't want to schedule our irrigation for high noon. All the water is going to evaporate before it gets a chance to get absorbed by the soil, and you've just wasted a bunch of water and the plants are going to die anyway. So we'd like to do it in the late hours or the early morning hours. Just personally, I think early morning is better because it doesn't keep your grass like wet all night. But either one of those is acceptable. And then lastly, stay current to new irrigation technology, strategies, and products. That ties directly into the third part, so the future that we need for this section. How are you going to look out on the horizon and identify future low-cost upgrades if you're not staying current to new irrigation technology, strategies, and products? So you can't have one without the other. And so speaking of that, what are some potential low-cost irrigation system upgrades? We like to minimize the use of spray heads. We like to install low consumption systems, just get rid of the spray heads altogether and use drip lines or subsurface lines. Maximizing the use of gray water or recycled water, depending on how your building is set up and what your local laws for that type of thing might be. And then consider the addition of rainwater catchment, cistern, storage equipment. I know that that can definitely border on the not low cost option, but it's a wide range of potential solutions there that can range from relatively low cost to pretty high cost, depending on what you're trying to do. And so in this section, additional items can be added that are complementary or similar to the irrigation water conservation concept. And the only sort of overriding principle is that they should not be redundant in things that are addressed in other parts of the manual. And if they are added here, they should just follow the same formatting, the same three-part structure. What is existing? Well, existing via sort of past research, current best practices, and then future, looking out on onto the horizon. So we can capture those additional projects here. Any questions? If not, I'll move right on. Part 5, equipment manuals. So equipment manuals, one of the traditional pillars of an O&M manual. I think when everyone pictures an O&M manual, they're probably thinking of equipment manuals following shortly. So this section covers all mechanical or operable equipment at the property. Just universally, it catches it all. So examples of this can include everything from HVAC systems down to individual unit appliances, to a list of, not a list, but a manual for all the different variations of smoke, fire, carbon monoxide alarms throughout the property, all the fire life safety equipment. Garage door equipment, water treatment systems, water fixtures, and water savings devices. That's something to note. So even though irrigation has its own standalone section, we're not treating that equipment separately. The water equipment still stays in the equipment manual section. We're only talking about the sort of systems in general in the irrigation section. We still want the manuals and the how-to in terms of maintenance to stay in the equipment section. It needs to be the sort of all-encompassing equipment section. And so what do we want to see when we're talking about these equipment manuals? Well, we want to see four parts generally. Some equipment this may not be particularly relevant to, but the default starting position is we need to get all 4 of these items for the equipment manual to be complete. And so first, cut sheets, just give the basic information about the system. Usually these are available either when you bought the equipment or when it was sold to you. The cut sheets should be readily available. They might be available online. Or for older equipment, it might be something that you have to generate internally, maybe like an Excel sheet or a Word document. The manufacturer's manual. So it's kind of funny. We're going like 3 levels deep in terms of the word manual. I'm noticing. So we have creating an O&M manual, and then we have equipment manuals, and then within the equipment manual we have the manufacturer's manual. So apologies for that manualception, but the idea is sound. Within the equipment manual section for each equipment, we need to have the manufacturer's original manual. And that provides the installation, the maintenance, the parts list, the contact information, all those germane details to that specific piece of equipment. And I'll mention it a little later on as well. But if you don't have the manual, if you inherited a bunch of equipment that you have no idea where it came from, odds are you can download it online, or at the very least call the manufacturer and get something from them. And then spec sheets, similar to cut sheets, but serving a little different purpose. This is more focused on physical dimensions and physical requirements of the equipment, and then system performance metrics, so you understand or at least have an expectation of what you should be getting out or putting in to the equipment. So cut sheets, won't necessarily have the space requirements. They won't necessarily have like the weight requirements. We would be looking for the spec sheets for that information. They're more technical would be the broader way to define that. And then warranties. What's our expectation for a manufacturer's warranty on a given piece of equipment? We need to know that. It needs to be documented here. It needs to be easy to find, so we're never in doubt about whether a particular piece of broken or malfunctioning equipment is in or out of its warranty. It needs to be readily available. And so here we're looking for what's the term, how many years, how many months, what are the conditions, am I allowed to do maintenance myself and still stay in warranty? If not, what are those conditions that will bring me out of warranty? That's especially important. And then any other assumptions that may go along with a specific warranty, knowing how to handle it, how to activate it, all those type of how-to details would be relevant here. So the parts required to produce each equipment manual should be readily available from the general contractor if you don't already have it on site. And again, this can come from the web if you're not having any luck with the general contractor. You can dig up the manufacturer's information and call the manufacturer to try to get it, but there are ways to get this information in nearly all cases. But obviously there are exceptions that will fall through the cracks, and so the idea here is just to put your best foot forward in terms of having all the information readily available and on hand. Any questions for section 5? All right.
Question.
Section 6, maintenance log template. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, could you hear me? Maybe you couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now, John?
No. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we did get a general question regarding TCAC expectations and requirements. I'm not sure if you can address this. If not, we can get back to them offline. But would you be able to address the O&M manual requirements for TCAC rehabs? And the example is what the information is that TCAC requires for those as compared to just measures installed.
You faded out for the last part of that question, but
Okay.
I actually got the gist of it. Is what are the TCAC requirements for was it O&M manuals in general or equipment manuals specifically?
O&M manuals for rehabs.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know that off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay.
There's another person in our office who is more of the TCAC expert. But if I don't have an answer for you by the end of the webinar, I will certainly have have it for you, sort of a post webinar.
Okay, and that's something that we can send out when we send out the materials. And then we have another question on PV warranties, when you were talking about the, including the warranties in Part 5, do you suggest inverters, modules, and overall system at a minimum, or any other components of the warranty that they should be including?
Yeah, so I would include, now, sorry, I think there's a connection issue because you faded out a little bit on the end, but I would say get as many of the individual warranties documented as you can. If there is something that you have to go above and beyond for, and that's where it cut off. So I wasn't quite sure if the end of the question was should we should we warranty it sort of independently outside of the manufacturer's warranty. But if the question was just documenting the sort of default manufacturer's warranty on the individual systems, right now the advice I would have to give is err on the side of over documentation and logging it all in the manual. But the practical advice is address it on a case-by-case basis. If something is so sort of minor in terms of replacement cost that it's basically going to take you more time to document it in great detail than it would be putting that time elsewhere, then obviously it's something that can be a judgment call.
Okay, thanks. That's all we had.
Okay. And so the question about the TCAC requirement, if the question was, is there any O&M manual requirement when doing TCAC rehabilitation projects, the general answer is there is a requirement if the selected points if the points have been selected for sustainable building management practices, and you can find sustainable building management practices in the regs, and that's something that we can send out afterwards if you'd like, and that tells you what's expected. So commissioning is the larger requirement, so the much heftier requirement, but there is an O&M requirement, but it is pretty basic. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, let's make sure to send out, the guidance that you just mentioned, John, when we send out the materials.
Yeah, and So to reiterate, the answer to is there O&M manual requirement? It's yes, and we can send out details about sort of what exactly they require. Okay, great. Questions are good. So part 6, maintenance log templates. So in this section, we're not looking to have this be a repository of the active maintenance logs. We're not requiring the building engineering or the building staff to come in to the O&M manual every day or every week and sort of save their logs. This section is primarily focused on keeping those templates secure and really findable for the broader building staff as maintenance just sort of goes about its normal course. So it should be broken out into 2 parts. One, the first part should address common items that'll be frequently checked, and then the second part should address the longer term items. Supplementary is a little bit of a funny word because it sort of I think it de-emphasizes their importance a little bit. So maybe a better way to say that might be short and long-term log. items. We should keep those two differentiated and sort of easily identifiable. When somebody is going into Part 6, they don't have to hunt and peck for the various logs. It should be easily identifiable. So a snapshot of what some of these items are is on the screen right now, and so we can just go through it briefly. You can start out with a summary checklist like this. So obviously these aren't log templates. This is sort of a introduction to the type of things that the log would exist for. But we can start out with it, like the O&M manual can start out with this, and it can have the guiding sentence at the beginning. Proper maintenance will extend the life of a building and the systems installed therein. In addition to specific manufacturer instructions for maintenance and service, the following checklist will assist setting a typical maintenance schedule required for a building. So again, it's kind of that same mission statement, that brand building idea as we had in section 1. We're continuously making sure that the team is buying into the concept of O&M manuals and proper maintenance, so they're not just going through the motions, but sort of invested in the why of why we are doing this. So weekly, monthly, semi-annual, annual, these are all important checklist items that will be part of individual logs. So you'll have perhaps your weekly log template, and your monthly log template, and your semi-annual template, and your annual template. But you can see here that it's pretty comprehensive, and I'm not going to read off every one because you can just look at it. But the idea here is to make it as comprehensive and relevant to your property as possible. So take this list, take the generic list that you find online. I think we can distribute a editable version of this list after the webinar, and again, make it your own. Add to this, subtract from this. But the idea is to start with something, and then tailor it to the most functional version of itself for your property and your team. And so for additional log items that may or may not be included in a boilerplate template, we can have grading. What is the correct grading on your site, and how do you fix it? That's a big one, and it might be extremely relevant to some sites and completely not an issue for others. And then gutters, that was an item on the list on the previous page, but it's something that should be noted. Where are they? Do all the buildings have them? And when should they be cleaned? Additionally, frost protected foundations, not relevant in all California climates, but certainly something to note if it is relevant. And similarly, seasonal/winterization procedures. Again, probably not a huge thing in like Los Angeles, for example, but certainly parts of the states where this type of thing is a major concern. So you would have your winter checklist and your spring/summer checklist to make sure that anything that might go dormant during the winter is addressed properly and no long-term damage is caused on the property. And then relative humidity checks. Is there high humidity? Is there low humidity? And include a brief narrative on these topics and the potential causes and fixes of them as well. So any questions with the maintenance log templates?
Not that I see at this time.
Great. So part 7, additional documentation. It's probably about what you think it is. In this section, we're including any additional relevant documents that just don't have a home in the previous six sections. So it's the miscellaneous, it's the catch-all, it's the when you're erring on the side of over documentation. This is sort of the home where other things can go. Examples may be maintenance logs that are specific to one type of equipment. So the idea of a maintenance template doesn't really make sense for it, so you could include it here. Also, additional HERS reports, for example, that could have been done but weren't. They can be included here for additional reference or future reference, depending on how you think the property might be projected to perform over its life. And really anything can go here. It's up to you. It's up to the specific building, but certainly don't shy away from making this section a robust section on its own. But the principles should still apply to this section. The idea of organization and ease of findability should be sort of paramount. So if it makes sense to have a summary itemization page in this section, followed up by more detailed documentation, or even subsections within this Part 7, whatever makes it easy for people to use, because not even O&M manuals specifically, but just in general, when you have these additional document or this miscellaneous folder, it does run the risk of just getting dumped on. Just everything gets thrown in blindly without looking at it. I know personally at home in my office, I have a desk drawer with a miscellaneous folder, and it's ugly. And so we want to avoid that type of pitfall in this section. So use it heavily, but keep the principles the same. And so those are the 7 parts of the manual. Now, looking specifically at frequently asked questions germane to the MUP program, we're just going to pick out some sort of high frequency topics and talk about them briefly. Let's see, time check. So it's a little past 11:50. So we will go a little over 12. My apologies, but I'll try to get through this relatively quickly. So here are the topics that I'm going to touch on: tenant interviews, MSDS, green cleaning, various forms of abatement, a flow combustion test, backdrafting identification, hand ventilation performance, testing water temperatures, weather stripping, and mitigating standing water. So tenant interviews and training. Why are we doing tenant interviews and training? It's because arguably the tenants are the most important part of the building. They pay the bills. They are really the whole reason why the building exists. And we want their experience to be maximized because happy tenants make for happy owners. We get lower vacancy with happy tenants. We get less delinquency with happy tenants, and we get potentially higher rental rates with happy tenants. So these are all good things, and it really mirrors sort of the office building concept of happy workers make for more productive companies. Same concept, just applied to the multifamily perspective. So interviews should be conducted with tenants annually, and special attention should be paid to health concerns, respiratory issues, heating, cooling issues, both on the comfort side and the cost side, and then organic growth concerns, and trip, slip, and fall concerns. And that's a big one from a liability perspective. When necessary, the tenants should be trained themselves to take these concepts and apply them to their individual units. So maybe they have an HVAC filter maintenance item that they can be trained up on and encouraged to do on a regular sort of optimal basis. And then general cleanliness with and cleaning products with volatile organic compounds. This is especially important with like pest control products and things like that that get sprayed around the property. I know I was just at a rental house over the weekend, and was eating breakfast, and I look out the window, and a termite guy walks by and sprays the entire outline of the outback patio area. So if I was a tenant, I would love to know what the best practices are in terms of keeping myself away from that area, keeping my kids away from that area, for how long, if I need to keep myself out of that area at all. So those types of things both are important from sort of an absolute health perspective, but also from a peace of mind perspective. Give the tenants information, give them almost too much information, and cut off any concerns at the path. Additionally, benefits of proper ventilation, using outside air or windows instead of central HVAC or window HVAC, using ventilation with the cooking appliances, those type of things. And then the health and safety concerns associated with those combustion appliances, and of course trip, slip, and fall hazards within the apartments themselves. All good things to know. And so MSDS's material safety data sheets. So these specifically, because we didn't talk about this item in the broader O&M manual, these items specifically need to be kept in their own binder and updated annually at a minimum. So the idea is that we want these to be readily available and easily identifiable, and again, the overriding theme of sort of essential depository in terms of not having to hunt for these things, not having to go into the equipment shed and find that safety data sheet that's shoved into the bottom drawer, that it's there out in the open for everyone to see and find in a timely manner. And then, so green cleaning. Obviously, this is a hugely important item for green certification programs, for LEED, for Green Globes, for TCAC, things like that. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, but the idea is reduce exposure of building occupants to the potentially hazardous chemicals and biological and particular contaminants that go along with sort of traditional cleaning products. So to do that, to maximize the green cleaning policy within your building, establish a standard operating procedure. So fundamentally, just have a green cleaning policy in place. It's one thing to say you're going to do green cleaning, but until that's written down in a sort of clear, coherent policy that everyone can reference and follow, it's going to be piecemeal and haphazard. So just write it down, get it in place, and then following through and purchasing the green products, and if they facilitate green equipment as well, that would be a concern. And then overall strategies for hygiene, for safe handling of products, and then training up the staff to use all of this green cleaning equipment, or to train them up on the policy and make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of how this new policy is going to be executed. Sometimes the training is a requirement depending on if you're going after a green certification or not. And so the abatement items, we're looking at lead and asbestos, something that you're all probably very familiar with. If you've ever rented an apartment in California, odds are you got the little lead pamphlet flyer. So the takeaway here is that just be aware that lead abatement is still an issue and it's something that should be addressed accordingly in the O&M manual. And at the end of the day, if there's any uncertainty, contact a third-party professional, and that's both on the identification side, on the remediation side. Goes back to sort of that stop sign at the beginning of the O&M manual. If there's sort of doubt that you have the sort of technical gravitas to tackle an issue, stop and bring in a professional. It may be a little painful up front to shell out some money for that, but in the long run, it's a much better approach and gives everyone much more peace of mind. Same thing with asbestos. Some materials are presumed to contain asbestos if they were installed any time before 1981, and these are the sort of traditional manufactured equipment that you would think of. Anything that's like, puffy like insulation, or anything that has any kind of thermal value or manufactured component to it from the 50s and 60s is a high candidate for asbestos. So we can see the list here. It's long and diverse, and you can get additional help from OSHA, both on the sort of identification and remediation side, by calling these toll-free numbers here. So again, the third-party rule, if you're unsure, don't touch it. Bring in a professional and have them identify and remediate as needed. Oh, and let's see. Okay, yeah, I was looking at this list. Yeah, there is popcorn ceilings on here, so spray-on coatings. Yep. All right. So next item, determining the flow of combustion products. So hot gases from the combustion process should be rising through the flue, up through the ceiling most likely, out of the building. To make sure that that's happening properly, there are a couple different tests that we can do really quickly and easily. If you have a smoke stick, you can activate the smoke stick, and you can see this in the photo, in the area where the flue is sitting right on top of the equipment, and the smoke will tell you all you need to know. If the smoke is getting sort of gently sucked into the flue, everything is working properly, more than likely. If the smoke is sort of just sitting there or getting pushed out into the room, then that's bad. It's a cause for concern. That would be when you call in a professional, or call the manufacturer, or activate one of those warranty concerns and get someone out to look at that equipment and make any corrections as needed. If you don't have a smoke stick, a little trick, you can get a mirror and you can hold it up to that area where the flue meets the exhaust of the equipment. And if everything's working good, the mirror will just stay as is. If it's working poorly and pushing air or gas out into the room, it'll hit the mirror, it'll condense or fog up the mirror a little bit and let you know that something is wrong. So similarly, we can look at backdrafting and spillage identification techniques. So historic backdrafting and spillage on an appliance, it can be pretty easily spotted by looking for corrosion buildup around exit exhaust points. So picture on the left, very similar to the exhaust and flue connection that we saw in the other pictures. This one has extensive rust though, so we can make a pretty accurate judgment that there's some backdrafting and spillage going on. And just for reference, I'll switch back to the other picture, and so we can see here it's very clear of corrosion and rust. There doesn't seem to be anything indicating the backdrafting or spillage here. Obviously, we can see it in this photo. And it applies to HVAC equipment with exhaust ports that aren't flued as well. You can see it in the Lennox picture on the on the right-hand side. So new equipment or altered equipment should be tested for this prior to regular operation. This is something that I would probably call in a third party to perform this test and have that peace of mind from a third party verification standpoint. So ventilation performance by hand. Most mechanical ventilation can be felt by pressure and temperature, quote unquote, sensors in the hand. Don't discount how sensitive your hand is. It's a great tool, and this is a convenient method to determine if a ventilation system is functioning as intended from a macro level. So this method helps diagnose issues like building shell infiltration. It's a great one for pressure differentials between spaces, mechanical ventilation operations, and moisture, indoor air quality control. So obviously, if you're doing something that requires a fine degree of accuracy, like if you need to do like ventilation calculations for like an Energy Star certification, or get a specific CFM measurement, the hand is not going to work. But if you're looking sort of a macro level, this is a great, quick, handy way to take note of things. And so testing water temperatures. So why are we concerned with water temperatures? For pretty significant reasons. One, we want to minimize the chance of Legionnaire's disease to grow in the domestic hot water tank. We don't want it to be possible. And we also want to save energy. We want to prevent tenant scalding. We want to reduce the runtime of the equipment. So again, saving money, saving energy. So we're so some of these things are a little running at odds with each other. For Legionnaire's disease, we want it to be basically as hot as possible. For to prevent scalding, we want it to be as low as possible. So we're definitely threading a needle here, and there are different tools and techniques that we can use to mitigate some of those concerns. But the idea here is that to prevent scalding injury, we really need to aim to keep the end use water at 120 or below, and whether that's via a domestic hot water set point or a thermostatic mixing valve downstream, that would be a preferred way to get there. And to verify the 120 end use, we can't just rely on like a thermostat setting or a thermostatic mixing valve setting. We need to go in the individual units and check the water temperature when it's maxed out on flow, maxed out on temperature at where the tenant uses the faucet, and just do that manual check to make sure that we're hitting our target. And then from there we can adjust from there we can adjust upstream, whether it's the mixing valve ratio or the final set point at the boiler. We can make adjustments there to meet our requirements. And then weather stripping. So use weather stripping on all operable building shell components if and when the following conditions are met. So one, the component is not part of a central or compartmentalized ventilation system. We never want to impede intentional ventilation with our weather stripping. Two, the weather stripping does not induce spillage of interior combustion appliances. So it's almost the converse of point number one, the opposite side of the same coin. And then three, the addition of weather stripping will not adversely affect the operation of the building component. Sort of a sanity check, just make sure we're staying within the bounds of weather stripping what should be weather stripped. So the obvious things, windows, doors generally, PTAC, HVAC, unit installations, those type of things are all obvious, great low-hanging fruit candidates for weather stripping. And you can see the graphic on the right. We have 9 different types of weather stripping, all great options, all serving a variety of functions. There's no school of thought that says one is superior to the other. The idea here is pick the right weather stripping for the application. Whether it's an exterior door or a window, find the weather stripping mechanism that works best for that specific application. And then lastly, mitigating standing water. So I think we can all agree intuitively that standing water is bad. We don't want mosquitoes. We don't want any of the mosquito-borne viruses to be spread. We don't want stagnant water with mold, bacteria, bad smells. All those things are obvious. So what are the 3 steps to mitigate standing water? 1, removal. Get rid of it. That usually involves a sump pump or some type of pumping or vacuum device to just get rid of the water initially. But obviously that's a symptom. We want to treat the cause. So we want to contain the source of the water that generated the standing water in the first place. We need to prevent further intrusion. So whether that is a site grading issue, maybe our slope is wrong, maybe it's a drainage issue. Was the site not drained properly to begin with? Do the drains need to be cleaned or maintained? And then maybe there's a moisture barrier that wasn't installed or is not working properly. Well, whatever it is, find the source of the water and directly address that issue. Do not kick the can down the road. Do not just address the symptom. Prioritize containment. And then obviously proactive maintenance. So once we have the cause identified and the containment achieved, we don't want that to go to waste. So proactively maintain, create a new log specifically for the water containment solution, and schedule checks of the area as necessary. Maybe immediately after repair, that's a weekly check that eventually grows to a monthly or a semi-annual check as over time we gain confidence in the solution. But the idea is to don't minimize it, don't put it on the back burner. Standing water and water concerns in general and plumbing concerns in general, they suffer from not being always visible, and by the time the issue becomes visible, extensive damage has been done. So just proactive steps need to be taken, both from a logging, identifying, and remediation perspective. So that's the last FAQ and the end of the presentation. So now I can open it up to general questions if anyone had any more questions, but otherwise I can hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks, John. I don't see any additional questions. We'll make sure to address, or send out, I should say, the information that we talked about, both the TCAC manual requirements for rehabs, for O&M manuals, and then the checklist in an editable format that John had shared as well. And so I think with that, we can probably go ahead and wrap up. We'll make sure to get the materials out to you. They'll likely come out next week, early next week, as we prepare everything and get it posted and get the recording up on the YouTube channel for all of you. So thank you, John, and thank you all of us for joining today and sticking around to the end. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.